Matthew chapter 10, beginning with verse 29. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. And everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I will deny before my Father in heaven. For do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. This is the word of the Lord. So today, I believe we're at the beginning of summer, and the weather is catching up with the calendar. And today is Father's Day. So we seek to say Happy Father's Day in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of lockdowns and illnesses rising and protests and rallies, and everyone is either overworked or underemployed. I think we all feel like we've developed a case of vertigo. It's hard to keep your sense of balance. And when life gets out of balance, we long for certainty, for those good old days when we thought we knew what was going on and what was coming next. But one thing I think that we're starting to see is that many people have never had that sense of certainty. For much of the population in our country and in our world, life has never been predictable. We assume that people that are walking down the street as we pass by or driving in the car next to us, well, we assume they're reasonably happy with happy families and they have jobs that pay the bills and they can go home to a house. They have a family that will step up if they need something. That was a big assumption even before COVID and economic instability and racial tension has swept us off the ground. It may be hard to believe that people made those same false assumptions 2,000 years ago, but they did. As we read last week, Jesus sent his students into places where people were hurting. And their purpose was to create healing communities, start the process both personal and social, setting up communities that would keep this healing going. But Jesus understood that there was something that was blocking this need to grow expansive healing communities. And we might say that that obstacle was the tightly bound family ties that existed and still exist. In the passage we read today, he wants them and us to understand that we need to rethink our assumptions, our expectations, our basic beliefs, and this time about family ties. I don't know if you all go by that old adage, never talk about religion or politics at a family reunion. I sort of feel like they said that in Jesus's time too. But he's getting at something even bigger than awkward conversations at your family gatherings. And I feel like his followers and the listeners were as shocked as we are in hearing these words. I don't think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And it's not that Jesus is against families being close and getting along. His goal is not to break up families. But his point is that there will be times when commitment to God and God's causes will create tension, trouble, a change in loyalties. Following Christ will sometimes include making very difficult decisions, Because when we really get it, when we really understand this message, it shakes up our values, it rearranges our priorities, it reorients our life goals. Now, Jesus has been teaching this message that this kind of kingdom of God is really near to us now. He's taught them that the meek and the poor are the ones who God calls blessed. And what? It's not the strong and the successful like we've always heard. He's taught them, forgive as you have been forgiven, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which wouldn't be so bad if he hadn't gone and included the enemies in that one. No, he had to go and say, you've heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say, love your enemies. So maybe at your family gatherings, they might agree with the part about forgiving each other, but when you bring up forgiving their enemies and things like respecting our Muslim neighbors and inviting in more refugees, well, that's when things begin to get uncomfortable. And saying Black Lives Matter is uncomfortable for a reason. It's causing us to rethink our own sense of identity, the way that our culture is structured, and it's uncomfortable. And when Jesus says, I have not come to bring peace but a sword, he is not telling anyone to carry weapons with them. He never told his disciples to take up a sword. Rather, he's reminding them that this message of God's kingdom, well, it's going to make other people angry, and it may become dangerous. And he pushes a little harder. He says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, or son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And again, he is not arguing against close family ties. He isn't saying that I have to love Jesus more than my mother or my father or my kids, but mothers and fathers and sons and daughters stand for that social structure of Jesus's day that was, in fact, rooted in family hierarchy, in top-down relationships and patriarchy and things that kept people from actually loving one another. He wants to change our understanding of family ties and family values. Family is important, but when our family ties keep us from caring for others, that's when it becomes a problem. Jesus was known to have said some, fairly provocative things about families. We know that he called James and John to just leave their family business and follow him. And when his mother and brothers wanted to speak to him because they were a little bit nervous that maybe he'd just gone a little overboard with this message, he replied, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And he pointed to his disciples and he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother. Those were very radical statements. We like to say that blood is thicker than water, but Jesus is saying that there is something stronger than blood ties. And it became clear that Jesus was bringing a new definition of family. A new definition of family that moves beyond the bounds of blood relationships and traditional families. He treated outcasts as families. He called his disciples sister and brother and children of God. We hear in our time so much about Christian family values, we assume that we could turn to almost any page in the scriptures, look in the Bible, and there we would have examples of the perfect family. But it's hard to find a description of our modern ideal of the traditional family with one man and one woman and 2.3 children living in their own home. We don't find that anywhere in the scriptures. And really, what family would you choose as your model as you read through the scriptures? Throughout the Bible's families look different, and they are complicated, and they are problematic. including the story that we read from today of Abraham, who fathered children by two women, Hagar and Sarah, from two different cultures. And we're going to come back to that family later because there is too much to unpack today. But then just a generation later, Jacob married Leah and Rachel and also had children by two concubines. And then there's the great King David. He won't do very well. He was married, and so was Bathsheba when he took her and made sure that her husband was killed in battle. Who would we choose from the New Testament? We have evidence that one of Jesus' disciples was married because he healed his mother-in-law. Timothy was one of Paul's closest co-workers. He had a Greek father and a Jewish mother, and we never hear about his father, and Paul praises his grandmother and his mother for raising him. It's almost impossible to find what we have come to think of as a typical family in the Bible. And Jesus understood the difficulties and the importance of family. And he wanted to expand that definition of what family means. For family includes the people that you invite into your life. It's really an open system. It can take in those who need family, like the orphans and the widows and the resident aliens among you, if we want to put it in biblical terms. But to many, this idea is threatening and it's divisive. But to others, it's an invitation to a new life and more love, not less. Last week I mentioned Mia Birdsong's book, How We Show Up, and I want to give space to her words again, coming from her perspective as a person of color in this generation. She points out that today less than half of adults in America are married. About 34 million of us are providing unpaid care to an aging adult. So many of us are kept from wrapping the resources of money and care and time around the people that we consider family. And for an ever-increasing number of us, the financial security that allegedly comes from hard work is elusive. And then there is our hidden history that is now beginning to come to light. She reminds us that Black people in America have been separated, stolen across an ocean, sold away from our people, snatched up and locked in cages, taken by Child Protective Services, abandoned because of unhealed trauma, 1 million devastations and hearts rended. When our deepest bonds are attacked, there is horrendous damage. There is suffering that is inflicted upon generations of people. But our love, our bond, the things that make us family, that allow us to make family, are not broken. When we are separated, we remake family. She reminds us that for decades, Black families have been described as broken. But part of what is harmful about that narrow lens is it misses what is beautiful, what is resilient and supportive and brilliant about the breadth and the fluidity of so many Black families. Mia shares many stories in this book of families that have been created not by birth, but by choice, by showing up for one another, by committing to care for one another, to raise children together, to be there in illness and in health. But this configuration of family continues to bump against the limitations of our cultural and national imagination about what family looks like and who is included when it comes to policies and practices. Jesus understood that family is broader and deeper than birth and blood. Today, I have hope that the kingdom of God that he spoke of is a little bit nearer. As people are free to marry who they choose, and maybe Maybe we will stop stealing black fathers and brothers and uncles and friends to feed our for-profit prison system. There are signs of hope, but we cannot let this moment slip away. But we know that calling for change is threatening, and it can be dangerous, just as Jesus taught us. But this is what the church is meant to be. Not a gathering where we all look alike and dress alike and pretend that we fit into the traditional family mold. Rather, the church is the people in the many places where we show up for one another, and for those who show up at our door and in our lives, who need family, who need God's big, broad, mixed up, hanging on, getting by, loving through the hard times, walking each other home family. This is who God has called us to be. This is what the one we follow taught over and over again. And this love is the one true tie that binds us together. So let's sing.